I'm not sure if anybody else caught Mike's first presentation at 1 o'clock, but I told a really great story about, I forgot this was back here, Mike. I told a great story about being on the Microsoft campus and going through the lunch line with Mike and a pile of food, and he got to the drink line, and he could choose anything that he wanted, anything on earth that he wanted. This is back before Mike Pagán pioneered the Fresca comeback, but I was standing behind him, and he realized he was super thirsty and grabbed a Fresca. At least it wasn't a Tab, Mike, right? FlexCare fact. How many FlexCares? Do you have anybody in the room that has a FlexCare managed services agreement? Cool. One FlexCare fact. If you don't know, now you know. NCI Pro and or hosted AV, NCI offers a monthly report, right? What does and doesn't have Pro and or antivirus on it. Budgeted customer, you can now subscribe to the report or the ticket by talking to your account rep. Shameless plug. Rather than you checking your devices to make sure, verify you get a report, NCI will now do those for you in monthly tickets. So I think everybody knows Mike. You've been around Mike long enough. Anybody not been in a Mike Pagán presentation today? I will save, well, maybe I will do a quick intro to Mike, and I'll do it just ad lib here. I've been at Network Center for 13 years. Mike outdates me by more than 25. I'm a Minot State University grad. Mike is from Minot State at the time. His dad was one of our professors. I remember Mike running around town. It was always fun to see him. He has two names. His name's Mike Pagán. One of our account reps always just introduces him as Pagán. Makes me laugh like he's a symbol, and otherwise known as Prince. Mike's been around for 25 years. He's been through almost every area of technology in Network Center and lately spends a lot of time in the Microsoft stack. He's deeply rooted in cloud. Mike was the first person, I think, other than maybe Rick Todd, to talk cloud at Network Center when I was there. Very well versed in the Azure stack that we're talking about today. You've all seen what's going on with VMware. None of us like it. My opinion is VMware has been underpriced, undervalued for a long period of time. Somebody was eventually going to pick it up and charge unfair prices for what it's worth. It's now overpriced, previous to being underpriced. I thought there'd be a modicum or a medium common sense meter that we'd get to. That seems to be out the window today. So the topic today is sort of wrapped around what your options are in migration to perhaps choose Azure or other alternatives ahead of it, and Mike's going to walk through a business model that's perhaps enables you to save a little bit of money. That's the title. Oh, Mike. Cloudy with the chance of savings, right? Mike Pagán, everyone. Take it away, Mike. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Like I said, we're talking about Azure and opportunities to get away from VMware, because it's a really timely topic, thanks to their new business model. But we wanted to do this presentation. A couple of years ago, I did one with the same title that basically walked through an existing customer's hardware quote, and here's that cost, and here's the price of quoting those virtual machines as Azure virtual machines, because it's easy to go, well, here's what hardware costs. I have to buy that once, and I'm going to run these virtual machines and take that monthly cost and multiply it by like 36 months or something like that. Well, obviously, in a lot of cases, Azure is more expensive when it comes to that, because you're paying per month, and virtual machines have a certain cost to them. But that presentation kind of goes through examining like total cost of ownership and return on investment. Like, you should be patching your VMware. You should be doing it at least quarterly, things like that. And I didn't want to reproduce that quote or reproduce that presentation, because the numbers change a little bit. Like, the price of hardware's kind of gone up a little bit. Azure's price is pretty stable. So the timeliness of VMware coming and hitting us over the head with their new business model, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of talk about with cloud options. There was another presentation earlier today. You can, if you didn't catch it live, you can catch it online here in a week or so. It talks about if you want to keep your virtual machines on-prem, here's some of the options that we think are viable for things like Hyper-V or Nutanix or Scale, or sticking with VMware. That's still an option at the end of the day. So a little bit about me. As Brad said, I'm a senior solution architect. I've been at Network Center for a number of years. I call this my NASCAR slide, because it's like the cars that drive really fast but they can't turn right. Bunch of stickers on there. But I have 3 kids, 2 cats, and a tortoise. And if you've been in this presentation earlier, I apologize. I haven't changed any of the jokes. They're exactly the same as they were before. So how does somebody become to own a tortoise that's likely going to outlive me? Well, my kids are in Scouts. My oldest went to a merit badge university and took the reptile and amphibian studies merit badge. And about a week later, I had a Petco bill and a tortoise. And he got the merit badge, and I figured I should get the merit badge too. So tortoises lead boring lives. Ours is a little more adventurous. We put him in the backyard to sun himself. Well, he decided to get out of his enclosure, and you don't think that they move very fast, but according to my Ring camera and my amateur measurements, about 30 feet in a minute. So it didn't take him very far to outstend the camera, and he was in our neighborhood for about 3 days until we found him. So I now gave myself the search and rescue merit badge. And this year I wasn't going to include anything about Gordon because he hasn't done anything recently because he's a tortoise. He takes a nap, eats some lettuce, and takes another nap. But this August, it rained 3 inches in about an hour, and my basement flooded. So we had to rescue poor Gordon, so I gave myself the life-saving merit badge. No, that's relevant, but I kind of want to set the stage that I don't intend this to be boring. We don't. It's not a packed house, so if we have any questions, we can kind of talk about them, in line. We don't have to necessarily wait till the end. But how do we get here? Kind of what are our options? Talk about a couple of scenarios that may be relevant. How do we move workloads to Azure, if that is what your choice ends up being? Wrap up in a summary. So how do we get here? Broadcom purchased VMware, and they decided to get rid of most of the licensing bundles that we in the SMB space would use. Essentials, Essentials Plus, even Enterprise Plus, gone. Standard still exists for renewals. I don't know if we can buy it anymore. We're also not a partner anymore. Broadcom, I think it has about 20 national-sized partners like CDW, gigantic companies. Organizations like us, we're just not partners. We can't sell it anymore. So if we do renewals, it's through a third party. We just kind of transfer, go talk to them. They'll help you get a renewal if you want to keep it. And adjusted prices should be in quotes because it is now only a yearly subscription. You cannot do a 3-year subscription anymore, as we've recently been told. And pricing is a lot more. It's not like software and subscription, you average 20% renewal every year, again and again. It is now a subscription with a minimum core count purchase. A local school had a single host. Their renewal was $12,000. And they were coming up to the renewal time and they hadn't decided to renew yet. And they got a cease and desist letter that they had to prove they were getting off the subscription that they no longer owned, which is definitely something. I was told not to say any more mean things about Broadcom. So kind of like, what are our options? So you can still renew VMware. Like if you just purchased new equipment and you don't have an opportunity to move to buy new equipment and migrate, that's the easiest path to get over to it. Renewing VMware is still an option. Migrate to Azure, take your virtual machines, move them to Azure. Do a cloud-first strategy. If you don't really need your servers really anymore, you can get rid of them. If I would say today, if anybody was starting a business, not having any servers and not buying any infrastructure is a valid thing to do because most startups, they don't have infrastructure, they don't have servers. It's all cloud services at the end of the day. So, and that other future virtualization presentation was earlier today, but if you want to catch that, it'll be on our YouTube channel in a week or so. So, benefit of doing sticking with Broadcom is it's the least effort. It is not pleasant to do, but you don't have to move anything. If you just bought a server and you don't have time to migrate, it isn't feasible to buy new equipment and to do a migration. If you don't have time, because of the cease and desist letters, you may just have to keep it and then plan ahead for next year. It's expensive. Problem is some of your licensing SKUs aren't available. So like I said, Essentials Plus are gone. And all of this is super dynamic. In the last 10 months, those SKUs have gone. The renewals have completely changed. The pricing structure has completely changed. Almost on a daily basis, when we send a quote in, it goes, yeah, you can't do that anymore. Renewal is different. Or there's a new minimum count for how many licenses you have to buy. So it has been interesting as a previous VMware partner. So depending on the wins and how Broadcom wants to do something, your renewal may look very different even next year, depending on how they do things. So we can migrate to Azure. It's great because it's flexible services. You can kind of build and expand everything that you want. It's easy to go out there and just, I want another virtual machine for whatever reason, to have a new application coming in. Here's the size, build it up, boots up, it's already got Windows on it, it's already up to date, you're ready to go install applications. So that is really powerful. If you stay in the pay-as-you-go model, it's month to month. So as soon as you're done using something, you can turn it off. There are still some charges if you turn off a virtual machine. It's the disk out there. But if you right-click and delete it, you're not getting charged per second for Microsoft licensing or the compute or any of the rest of that kind of stuff. So if you're the type of environment that likes to test things, that's a pretty viable thing. And I put an asterisk next to monthly commitment because there are ways to commit to Azure on like a 1 or 3 year term. And through that process, you do get discounts. So in the previous presentation, when hardware was buying hardware and just keeping it forever, and then month to month of Azure, it's easy to look at the math and go, okay, 4 years, Azure's way more expensive. But when you do that, or if you start doing the commit, by the end of it, it became pretty on par. And when you think of, if you have an environment, and as things are going, if you have an application, we see it all the time, like, oh, that application, they're not supporting on-prem anymore. You have to use their cloud service. Well, if that's on one server, you can right-click and delete it, and you pay less. If it's on-prem, you've already paid for the capacity, you're not getting any discount. So depending on how you want to account for things or how you want to spend your money, this is a very dynamic thing. And if you forecast that you're going to be getting rid of services, getting rid of applications, this has more merit because instead of buying a $14,000 server and getting it installed and having whatever hypervisor running it, in 2 months, if you get rid of 4 virtual machines, then you have all this capacity that you're probably never going to use. So, problems with things running applications in Azure is things may not run very well over VPN connection. QuickBooks is really bad over a VPN connection. Other manufacturing apps, other things like that, SQL databases, it's typically not supported over a VPN connection. So then you're adding things like remote desktop or Azure virtual machines or something, or Azure desktop in there to be closer to the data so you can run your things effectively. And it can be more expensive to buy in hardware. If you don't factor in the hypervisor that is Azure, you don't have to update it, you don't have to patch it, you don't have to do anything with it at the end of the day. And that saves time and effort and stress doing all those things. And even with an additional benefit of Azure is all the virtual machines are sized like a Happy Meal. Like, I'm going to buy this virtual machine. It's two processors, 8 gigs RAM. Well, on the back end, it's all running on hardware. They go through and cycle their hardware. So the original projects I had building VMware virtual machines, it's version 3 virtual machines, which is on a particular type of processor and architecture. Well, they want to get rid of that stuff, and they want more efficient virtual machines out there, so they're changing out their equipment. Usually you can go, and if you take a look at it every once in a while, you can now go to version 6, and it's not typically any more expensive. It's usually the exact same cost, and you've instantly upgraded the speed and capability of the motherboard in that system by turning it off, changing the size, and booting it back up again, which is really beneficial. So it's not any different than an on-prem hypervisor. It's literally just your virtual machines running somewhere else. It's no different if you pick them up and move them into a private data center somewhere. Your endpoints connect over a VPN connection to your applications or to your virtual machines if they RDP or do something like that, but it's still virtual machines at the end of the day. So other thing you can do is you can do a cloud-first strategy. If you don't think you need any of your actual applications, the binaries and executables, clients and stuff that you install, if it's all web page, if you kind of look at it and go, everything we use is a web page, is there cloud versions of that hosted by that company? You can migrate to those services, and then if you don't have anything in the building other than like Active Directory, maybe file services, well, now you're a pretty good candidate to just get rid of servers altogether. So same type of things. You pay for what you use. It's your licenses per user. It's capacity for your SharePoint libraries, things like that. It's easy to add more capacity. I need more SharePoint licenses, or I need this kind of thing. So it's just adding licenses to users, and it's no servers. So this is it's great in concept. I think it requires a lot of forethought, because committing to like a cloud first requires kind of adding other services. Because right now we have like Veeam or something back in virtual machines. Well, okay, it is easy to say, well, I'm just going to put it in the cloud and Microsoft's going to take care of it. They do. Their responsibility and their published shared responsibility model is, we're going to keep your infrastructure up. Ultimately, the data integrity is your responsibility, because if something happens, we'll restore it, but it's not our responsibility to make sure it's the most up to date, or make sure it's consistent, or nobody tampers with it. So that's why adding like other like Microsoft 365 services to back up your Teams channels, or your mailboxes, your OneDrive, things from like AvePoint, have backup services for this. And so you have to kind of think outside of that. It's not, I can just say I'm going to back up these virtual machines. You have to find other ways to protect that data. Not all services work with Enter ID yet. Like obviously all the Microsoft 365 things do. Things like Salesforce, other things will integrate, so you can use the same identities to log into them that you do. But if you have a particular application, they may not be ready to do that yet. So you may be stuck using a different set of credentials, which it's fine, but it's not the best user experience. That my username and password to get into this is different than this. And end users will require training. I'm used to growing up and having like an F drive or a data drive, and here's where all my customer documentations are, and here's where we save our proposals and do all that kind of stuff. Going to like a cloud only kind of thing is, okay, now all my stuff is stored in a Teams channel or a SharePoint library. And I'm an old dog, and I like things the way they are. I want it to be easy, and map drives are easy for me. So it's taken me a while to kind of get used to where things are at. I like it now, but it requires things to change. And if you have business processes where Bob from accounting runs the reports and he copies and pastes it into a map drive, well, that doesn't exist anymore. You have to kind of teach Bob to do something a different way, and Bob may be resistant to change. Like, he may not want to do anything differently, and new stuff is scary. You have to figure it out. You have to work with people, because they've been doing this for years and years and years, and at the end of the day, if it changes, how's it going to affect my day? It's going to slow me down. It's going to, they don't care that it's good for the organization. It saves you money. It affects their day and how they do things. So some of that is, top of mind when you're going through that type of thing. So like cloud first, what it looks like is, all your applications are web-based. M365 is obviously web-based, and you have your apps. Your Active Directory goes away, and everything is an Enter ID identity, so it's just cloud only. And it really does free up some of the restrictions that we have with Active Directory. Active Directory has existed forever. Enter ID is kind of new, and it started, very recently. So it's not tied to some of the old archaic things that Active Directory is tied to. So there's more inherent security built into it, more flexibility to do dynamic groups and add, based on some of the attributes to do certain things. So you lose group policy, and that has always been something that I've been concerned about, because working in regulated industries, that has been always how we've secured environments, disabling SMB, turning things on and off. It's always been group policy. Well, now you use Intune or something like it, like a cloud management device thing, to push settings and registry keys and install software, do that kind of thing. And then kind of a last benefit is something you wouldn't originally think about. If you use Copilot for Microsoft 365, it is kind of, it is not able to be as effective as it is if your file services, you have file servers on-prem, because it doesn't know all of your information. It only knows what's in your inbox, or your OneDrive or SharePoint libraries or Teams channels, things like that. If you have a lot of information or sales proposals or whatever it ends up being on a map drive on a file server, it can't see that yet. There isn't an agent to connect, so your context isn't grounded in that information. really to take benefit of Copilot in those documents. You either have to upload the document in that particular question session, or it has to be able to see them natively, which means moving them all up into a SharePoint library, a Teams channel, and that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about two different scenarios and kind of show which things fit. So MedTech, small medical sales company, they sell Band-Aid and Band-Aid accessories. They have a single host. The amount of resources in them kind of doesn't really matter, but it kind of shows, it's not a very big system. They don't really do a lot. Application server, domain controller, file server. All the applications are cloudy. So like their EMR or their Salesforce or whatever is all cloud. They don't have anything really installed locally. It's just maybe one application that can be moved. They have like multiple offices, and a lot of employees work on the road. So we run into this an awful lot because if you have Active Directory, most things organizations use, like your mail server is 365, so you don't have to connect to a VPN tunnel to get your mail anymore. Your file services are probably in your email, or it's a Teams channel or something along those lines. And if the application is already in the cloud, kind of the only thing you need to connect your VPN connection to is to change your password. And if you've ever dealt with a non-technical user base, they'll forget they have a VPN client, and they'll never connect to it. They'll change their password locally. The password will work locally. They'll come into the building to plug the laptop in and automatically lock themselves out because passwords don't sync, because it needs to talk to line of sight to the domain controller, and it just causes problems. If you're doing cloud only in this case, it makes it much more efficient because they just talk to Entra ID. That's their identity source. And you can mix and match this as you go through it. So just kind of an example of 365 costs, if you do business premium, which is what we recommend, it's upgrading licenses, additional backup services, so like a platform to back up your Teams channels, your SharePoint libraries, that kind of stuff. It's something you wouldn't have before, but if you had on-prem backups, that goes away. So it's kind of a replacement for it. And you have a project to retire your old servers and do some sort of migration. So if you have a bunch of file services, file shares, things like that, you can just dump them into a SharePoint library. It is not the most effective way to do it because you just replace one with the other. Usually you want to look at it with some idea of what documents you want to keep, how you want to structure it. You put additional security on it, like this is accounting information. We want to put that in a separate site where only certain people can get access to it. So no more server hardware, no more Microsoft on-prem licensing, no more firmware updates, no more security updates, no more secure, faster provisioning of services. Somebody says, hey, we bought this business. We have 20 new employees. Just assign them more licenses, and here's where you get access to your information compared to creating users on-prem and getting them connected and log in the domain, all that kind of stuff. Like the Entra ID, if you were in the presentation where we had like autopilot in it, you can hand them a laptop, it'll provision itself. They already have an Entra ID. They have to sign their username and password and they can get to work. Like the start time to when they can be productive with their end devices, when you start pushing more cloud first, can be shortened. All users should have like business premium or F3 licensing, which is a license that a lot of people forget about. It has a lot of the business premium features, but a tiny mailbox. It's not for people who sit at a desk on a regular basis, but if you have people that are in the field or, they just don't sit at a desk, but you need a way to contact them that has Teams, it has email. Tiny mailbox is only 2 gigs, so it isn't for email hoarders at the end of the day, but it does get like Entra ID Plan 1, so you can do conditional access and things with them. It does get Intune, so if they have devices, you can control them. You're going to use Intune to manage endpoints, configurations, kind of covered most of this kind of stuff. But it does require being able to move all your things to like an as-a-service type of thing, migrating away from installed application on a server to a cloud version of that's available. Second scenario is an agricultural company with 80 employees, host with 7 virtual machines running on it. But all the applications they have, their bean counting application is older, they don't have a cloud service for it yet. So what would you do in that particular case? It's the core part of the business is this application. You can't use a cloud service that the company doesn't offer it yet. And everybody's in the office most of the time. So cloud first probably doesn't make a ton of sense. Although you can do hybrid, you can absolutely do a mix and match of items. But, estimated Azure cost on those virtual machines just very generically could be around that much, depending on size and performance and whatever you need. And then there's labor to migrate all the virtual machines to Azure. So there's no more server hardware to maintain, and you can get it down to the point where it's pretty consistent prices. It isn't such where if you have all your virtual machines and they're all pretty static, you're not actively changing them, your month-to-month bill is plus or minus like 5%. That isn't a crazy thing out there. There are definitely Azure services that if you, depending on consumption, can charge you a lot of money. We used one, Azure Sentinel, and something bonkers happened, and I got the bill, and it was $26,000. And I'm like, what? And because I was wondering why my credit card wouldn't work, because I was trying to ding my credit card for it. And something happened internally where it went from ingesting like 2 gigs of logs to like 80 gigs of logs. And that service, if you ingest a lot, it's a SIM, went to the moon. And I opened a case about 6 weeks later. Microsoft's like, yeah, we can't figure out what happened. We're just going to credit it back. But that was a very stressful 6 months or 6 weeks for me, because I'm like, I don't have that much money built up or trust in the organization. I think I'm going to get canned. But Azure virtual machines in general are pretty consistent. So what kind of this looks like is you're going to create virtual machines. It's just like having a satellite office. So all of your offices need to connect back to it to access the virtual machines in a new location. We're going to create new ones or migrate them. If you have remote desktop services, you consider Azure Virtual Desktops, and then find a way to back up the virtual machines, because you still need to back them up, whether it's Veeam or use the native Azure services to do that. So the most common solution in this type of scenario, cloud first, is still a little futuristic for a lot of organizations. They'll have some sort of constraint that they can't get through. So it's basically migrating things to Azure. So if you've made the decision to move to Azure, what are you going to do? You can move to new virtual machines, create new virtual machines. You can back them up and restore them, kind of through a conversion process, or you could use the Azure Migrate service. Moving to new virtual machines is creating a new virtual machine, migrating the data, reinstalling the application, pointing the endpoints to the new location, and then rinse and repeat through all your different services. So it's the same as that we've always done. Have new operating systems, new virtual machines, migrate the data, and we're done with it. So, and then configure Azure backups. You always want to protect the stuff. And sometimes the old ways are the best. The benefits is you get a fresh operating system. You're not carrying over any technical debt of a weirdo operating system that's always been flaky. It happens every once in a while that thing just runs weird because something they got installed on it. And you can have the opportunity to install your applications differently. If you originally installed your SQL Server to everything be on the C drive, you get a chance to say, okay, I want to break this out to a couple of different disks to follow best practices or whatever for your application. You can control the migration process, so you can choose what order to do them in. You can be very granular about, okay, I'm going to move this server first and then worry about the other ones later. It isn't an all or nothing kind of thing. And then you have the opportunity at that time to say, I'm not going to move this block of information, because we all have file shares that has 60% of the information nobody's touched in over X amount of years. Let's just not move it. Let's not move it. Let's not back it up. Let's not worry about it. This can be labor intensive because it's just a file server migration. You're going to go through the same labor that you've gone through every single time that you've gone through this process before. You need to find your software licensing. Sometimes software apps are old and archaic. The company doesn't exist anymore. Like, how do I reinstall it if I can't get support? Sometimes applications like Dynamics to move to a new server is crazy expensive. I don't know if anybody's had to go through that. It's almost extortion to move to a new server because they have to do the migration for you. So I've seen other applications that, oh yeah, we have professional services tied to that. So it isn't as such as like building a virtual machine. They need that application vendor. It's like, oh, our labor bill for that is $20,000. So sometimes that's not really feasible. Sometimes your apps may have compatibility issues with the newer operating systems, and your endpoints you're going to have to point to. Instead of FSO1, it's FSO2 or AppO2 or those types of things. DNS is our friend, so hopefully there's generic username, generic URLs and stuff on it. Another option is to back up and restore the existing virtual machines. Most of us have Veeam, so you already have backups. It's a matter of restoring those backups to Azure. They have the ability to do a conversion during the restore process and restore everything up there. It's best for quick migrations of a small number of virtual machines. Think of what kind of window that you could do a restore in an evening, and you can roll this out over a amount of time. But it's a pretty good scenario if you have 4 virtual machines. You probably get that done in an evening, depending on your upload speed. It's a quick migration. There's less work on endpoints because your usernames don't change. Software version's not changing. The IP address is going to change because it's in a different subnet somewhere. So as long as DNS gets updated, most apps are able to handle that. There's less work on endpoints. And if you do a restore and the virtual machine doesn't boot or doesn't work right, you just delete it and turn on the virtual machine. So it's a pretty safe way of going through this process. You can have, if that virtual machine has any issues, if it has like just odd things that happen to it because of a piece of software that was installed that you cannot install, that problem is going to travel with you. The virtual machine is the same here as it is up there. And then if you don't have a lot of bandwidth, if you have larger virtual machines, that restore process might take a while. So you may have to kind of schedule and work through those types of things. Azure Migrate is a service. It's technology that Microsoft purchased a number of years ago. And basically what ends up happening is you deploy a virtual machine on your existing environment. It can be a physical machine. It could be in Hyper-V or VMware. You deploy it. You connect it to your hypervisor. You can run an assessment where it kind of gives you an idea of like checks for readiness, like this virtual machine will run in Azure. This one won't because of this odd thing, and it does a report on it. And it'll try to estimate costs based on usage that it sees. So it says, well, here's the size of the virtual machines you have to use, and here's the disks that you have, and it kind of kicks out like an MSRP type price at the end of it. I haven't done a ton of these. At the end of the day, I typically go through a manual calculation of the Azure calculator that's publicly available. I just pick the size of my virtual machines and the disks and build it out, and I use that. So I don't have a lot of comparison of if that assessment is true to like calculating your own. But if you do the assessment or not, basically in the service online, you pick virtual machines and say replicate. And it goes, and as information is written to the virtual machine, it batches it up and sends it off to Azure into a cached storage account. And then this technology is also part of their Azure Site Recovery service. It's the same technology. But for the migrate feature, it's basically a test migration or test failover or an actual failover with no intention of ever failing it back. So they got a twofer when they bought this technology. It's free for 180 days. Outside of that, there's fees, and you will pay for storage fees. So if you have information in a storage account, there's certain cost to it. It's not very much at the end of the day, but there are some charges there. It's a quick migration because you push a button, it hydrates the virtual machine data that's been copied up there and dehydrated, builds a virtual machine, boots it up, and there it is. So it's a very quick thing to do. And the interesting thing about this technology in general, it's not built on snapshots, so it's not like Veeam, where you say, okay, once a day or once 12 hours, I'm creating a snapshot of this virtual machine. It runs continuously. So the last place I installed this, the virtual machines, the RPO was about 7 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes. So the timeliness of the data on that virtual machine is really current. And it's an easy fallback plan, and it's less work on endpoints because the virtual machine is exactly the same up there, except for it has a different IP address. You have to deal with that. It is a bit of a longer process because we do have to deploy that appliance and get it connected to the hypervisor and wait for the replication to happen and go through that. It's not terrible, but it is a little bit longer than doing a backup and a restore. It does require resources for the Azure Migrate appliance. It's not a tiny thing. It's not terrible either, but if your host happened to be like really taxed with space and requirements, you may have to find a different box to run that on to run that appliance. And same thing, application issues or operating system issues are going to travel with it because it's exactly the same virtual machine just running somewhere else. So that, in a nutshell, is a couple of different scenarios. Looking at cloud first or moving to Azure, and a couple of different ways to get to Azure. I'm doing a little bit more Azure Migrate and/or ASR type of deals. A lot of organizations are. This is a 2016 virtual machine. I don't want to move a 2016 virtual machine up into Azure. I'm just going to create a new virtual machine and migrate my data, and that'll be done with it. About a year ago, moving a 2016 virtual machine to Azure would have locked you into that version or into 2016 because they didn't support in-place upgrades. Now you can, it is possible to do in-place upgrades up in Azure. So if you had moved a 2016 server just to get it up there, and you're like, okay, well now I want a different operating system. Now you're back to I'm going to create a new version of Windows on 2022, migrate my files, delete the other one. And while that's happening, you're paying for two virtual machines at the same time. So now the ability to do in-place upgrades is pretty cool. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Versus using like a regular traditional VM SQL server, can you speak to viewing experience or benefits of using like an Azure SQL instance versus like a dedicated SQL?
I don't do a lot of SQL work, but when I've done the pricing and taken a look at it, Azure, depending on what it is, it can be a lot less expensive to do any of the three different Azure SQL versions. We needed to create a reporting server and needed a SQL server. And if you don't pay attention to Microsoft licensing, if you have a SQL server in your environment, if it is on VMware or any hypervisor and has live migration capabilities, you're supposed to have software assurance on it, and it's supposed to be 4 virtual CPUs, which automatically makes it expensive by many factors. It's not just buying a copy of standard. Even copies of standard are supposed to have software assurance. So you can do managed SQL instances, or you can do single database. And if you price it in like the DTU model, there's a little utility that you can run off on the SQL server, and it'll calculate and say, you need this many DTUs, which is some sort of random abstract RPM version of how much SQL resources you need. I ran it against our CRM platform that's running a full version of SQL. I think it ended up being $160 a month if I would copy that up and run that. Now, our CRM software does not support that, so I can't do that. But if I was to move the whole thing up there, Microsoft has agents in the virtual machines. It knows I'm going to be running SQL, and unless I go check the box that says your hybrid benefit, I have purchased a different license, check the hybrid benefit box, it's going to bill me for SQL standard on a per second basis. So it automatically takes a $180 virtual machine to about $540 virtual machine. So if you do migrate a SQL server and you're going through like the calculator, make sure to check the box to say like SQL standard so you get accurate pricing, because it's like, well, why is it twice as expensive? Well, they can see you have SQL on it and they're going to charge you for it unless you attest that you have your own licensing for it. So I'm hopeful that more application vendors allow us to do like Azure instances of SQL. A particular piece of security software, I asked them specifically, I'm like, oh, well, if you're going to run this data classification product, you need SQL. And I'm like, that just makes this solution from your cost and the operating system to paying for SQL. And if they don't have another SQL server, that makes this real expensive real fast. Can I use Azure SQL? They're like, we don't support that yet. Bummer. So.
And I think some of that too, like I look back to like virtualization, bleeding edge, and there's vendors that were like, we don't support VMware, we only support physical servers. And I'm like, you wouldn't even know you're running on VMware. I'm just going to do it anyway and ask for forgiveness later.
Mm-hmm.
Or deny that it's doing it anywhere and just like run E1000s so you don't even know that you're running VMware.
and honestly, most support companies, even if you ran VMX net, they don't know to look. Maybe if they see the VMware tools icon, somebody might catch it. Case in point, when Cisco was starting to support virtualization of their call manager product, the only supported virtualization platform was VMware, but VMware running on Cisco UCS servers. I'm like, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. The whole purpose of virtualization is to abstract hardware. Like, I was talking to the salesperson, he's like, we know that's what we want to sell servers. I'm like, cool.
I would think the same thing would apply to running a SQL instance. It's like, it's a SQL instance. Like, you can, I'm assuming you can still choose the compatibility mode of SQL, and the vendor's not going to be different. It's just database.
Correct. Yeah, I think even database people get kind of itchy about letting us non-DBAs install the database or do things. I'm like, okay, well, give me a guide. I'll follow the guide. Or you get into it. And they'll do that. But at the end of it, like, did you set up backups? Did you set up a maintenance job? Well, no. Well, you're a crappy DBA, man. Like, you're soup to nuts supposed to do this, and you didn't do that. Like, but that's like one of the benefits of like platform as a service, of doing like SQL managed instances or single databases, is it's taking care of the backups for it. I was just doing some training along that line, and doing like SQL clustering or doing always on availability sets, that kind of stuff on-prem, looks super scary. In Azure, it's like 4 buttons, and they'll replicate your SQL database to another region like 400 miles away, automatically set it up and get it going. And then the app is almost immediately ready for if this dies, so it can fail over, or depending on how you set it up, this is a read-only copy. And that gets into like heavy application, like what do you want this thing to do? So more of like global scale kinds of things with it, well more than I ever end up dealing with things. But it seems way easier to do it out there and do that. And you can secure things with like the Azure SQL instance, because by default, your SQL communication is over the internet. But you can do private endpoints. So if you have a VPN tunnel between your location and Azure, you can do a private endpoint, and your communication has to be tunneled to talk to your SQL server. So you get the benefit of it running and being managed by Microsoft. You don't have an operating system to patch, and it's less expensive, and you do get a security by controlling the traffic. So I think that's really cool. We just don't do a ton of like SQL work, and the stuff we do is like, hey, we need a SQL server. Next, finish kind of thing. So yeah.
So going to your cloud first, that's really interesting to me, because that's kind of the strategy that we're trying to take, is going cloud first. But what I found is that domain controllers are the dirty little part of that, right? There was a session today here that somebody was saying, run a domain controller in Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've talked to Microsoft folks that are like, hey, you can go Entra, but you should probably have a backup domain controller on-prem. So my question is, like, have you seen viably anybody actually get rid of Active Directory fully from their environment? And like, what was their path to get there?
Mostly they just hate servers. They don't want to do another upgrade. It's like 16 grand plus labor to buy a thing that they're running 3 virtual machines on, to run a single domain controller on it and secure it and update it and patch it and do all that kind of stuff. And they're like, at some point in time, it's not even a technology decision. Somebody's like, I just want that loud thing out of my office. And that's the impetus to start down that path. That works too. But I originally, when it was like, oh yeah, like 8 years ago, coworkers like, oh, where'd you get rid of this? We're not gonna have domain controllers anymore. I'm like, whoa, buddy, like, how are we supposed to do all this stuff? We'll figure it out later. Well, now it's been a number of years, and we do have some viable options that make sense to take care of these types of things. Back then, they would have sold, Azure still makes an Azure Active Directory domain services. Well, they will spin up 2 domain controllers for you as a service and have that out there. If you were considering that, look very look at the fine print, because it doesn't do group policies. It doesn't do a ton of stuff. It is not a domain controller at the end of the day. It was made for web applications that require Active Directory to function. That's why they made it. And it's $400 a month or something like that. So I can spin up a 2 CPU, 8 gig of RAM Windows instance and run Active Directory domain services on it for $180 a month. So with all the limitations on that, it is not what we think it is. Because I've looked at it a couple times, I'm like, nope, this thing's weird. We're not doing that. I do think the cloud first, and it isn't an either or thing, right? So even internally, we've argued about how we're going to do things, and some people are more forward thinking and some people aren't. So we try to mix and match and figure out what's a good fit. We find that for people that travel a lot, because we all have remote employees now. We have some that work in Bismarck, and for a while we had somebody sitting in Denver. Like the burden of turning on a VPN connection just to authenticate to the system and keep that password and stuff synced up, it was silly. You don't need it anymore. So we're starting building, when we rebuild laptops, our laptops are intra-joined only. They are not domain hybrid joined. So all of the control plane is Intune. We sign in, all of our SaaS apps work. It gets weird when you're trying to connect to like DFS. It doesn't know how to do anything with DFS, but if you connect to the domain controller locally, because there's something called Cloud Kerberos, which is a new thing this year that allows us to talk to file servers that way. Before, you just couldn't do it. That's the impetus of moving everything into like a SharePoint library or Teams channel, that kind of stuff. Now you can kind of keep file servers around, but we find for salespeople that are remote or people that are fully remote, if all of our tools are web only, why even give them a tunnel into the network? Because that is another attack point. And if everybody's working from home or someplace, there's been plenty of stories where something at somebody's house hopped onto the work device and now they have a tunnel into your network. So if you're not doing enough monitoring or that kind of stuff, it's just an entry point that you don't need. So we've pushed those things at arm's length. And so far, there's odd things that don't work. So if you have like Cisco Wireless and you require certificate authentication, well, I'm not logging into the domain to get a group policy, so I'm not getting that certificate, so I can't get on the wireless. But now there's Cloud PKI, and now like Cisco ICE and other things allow you to import an on-prem certificate authority and push it out with Intune. So like all of these other like rough edges are kind of getting like softened and sanded off. So it's becoming more and more of a thing. Like every single environment is going to be case-by-case basis, and that's kind of why you start a direction and start like, these seem like good candidates to do that with. There's always going to be things. We still use Dynamics, so our accounts and stuff are going to be hybrid joined because they need that to work. Because I don't know how we would authenticate them in unless it's domain authentication. But at some point in time, they're going to stop, or we're not going to be able to afford it. They're going to make us do Dynamics 365, or we're going to have a different platform. Then those servers go away. Accountants get connected to intra-joined also, and then that problem goes away. You get different problems, but that one goes away. Well, if nobody else has any questions, thanks for attending. If you want to hit me up later, I'll be out here all day. Another session. I think the panel starts at 4. Thanks for your time.